So good afternoon and welcome to ScholarSip. I'm Danuta Yatetsky, Dean of Libraries, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our Winter 2022 event. First, I want to note that we are recording the session, which you all should have heard by now. I ask everyone in the audience to please stay muted throughout the presentation. We'll have time at the end for questions and comments, and I look forward to the engaging food for thought discussions that ScholarSip is known for. Now, I must admit, it continues to amaze me that we have been hosting ScholarSip for a decade. We created this event to help build cross-disciplinary community of intellects at Drexel and to connect inquisitive dragons to scholarship. The very first ScholarSip was held in March 2012, and we featured Youngmoo Kim, founding director of the Excite Center and professor of electrical and computing engineering. Since then, we have featured speakers from all 13 research-active colleges and schools and brought together over 1,000 Drexel faculty, staff, and students for this food for thought discussions and a toast to celebrate the end of each academic term. During a typical year, we host 3 events that take place on the last day of classes during the fall, winter, and spring terms. This year, to celebrate this milestone anniversary, we are hosting 10 food for thought presentations by Drexel faculty, staff, and students across all disciplines and areas of research running through June 2022. Today's session marks 3 down, with 7 more to come. You'll find the full schedule of events on our website, and I hope you will join us for these engaging events. Back in December, I noted that this year also marked the return to limited in-person gatherings. We were able to gather in person in the Study Hotel next door for that event, but unfortunately, we've had to pivot again and return to a virtual location for today's session due to the uncertainties surrounding COVID and the Omicron virus when we began our planning in early January. With spring on the way, yes, and we know what spring now is like. For those of you from the Midwest, you have to have a good snowstorm, right? As you think you're hitting 60s and 70 weather. So with spring on the way and COVID cases declining, though, we have renewed hope that we will gather together again on campus for the spring term event on June 6th. Regardless of your location, I want to thank you all for joining us over these last 10 years, and particularly during these demanding and uncertain times. We genuinely appreciate your continued support of the Drexel Libraries. And now I'm very pleased to introduce today's thought-provoking speaker, Drexel Professor Sharrelle Barber. Dr. Barber, an assistant professor of epidemiology, I would stumble over that word, my apologies, and biostatistics in the School of Public Health, is a social this is going to be bad, sorry, epidemiologist and scholar activist whose research focuses on the intersection of place, race, and health in the United States and Brazil. Her work is grounded in interdisciplinary theories and enjoys various advanced methodological techniques, including multi-level modeling and longitudinal data analyses. Through her empirical work, she seeks to document how racism becomes embodied through the neighborhood context and how the structural determinant of racial health inequities can be leveraged for transformative change to advance anti-racist solutions. In addition to being an active faculty member, Dr. Barber serves as the director of the Ubuntu Center on Racism, Global Movements, and Population Health Equity, which launched in November 2021. The Ubuntu Center's mission is to unite diverse partners to generate and translate evidence, accelerate anti-racism solutions, and transform the health of communities locally, nationally, and globally. Dr. Barber has provided expert commentary on the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 in Black communities and racism as a public health crisis for local, national, and international media outlets, including the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and NPR, to name just a few. In March 2020, she convened a group of public health experts from Harvard, UCLA, and other academic institutions across the country to serve as an advisory committee to the Poor People's Campaign. These institutions provide justice-centered public health expertise to the campaign. So now, before I turn the Zoom controls over to Professor Barber, let me continue our ScholarSip tradition with a virtual toast to the end of the winter term. So whatever you have handy, whatever your container, lift it for the best luck of finishing this winter term. If you are on the teaching faculty, be kind to your students. Give them the benefit of the doubt. It's been tough for everyone. And here's to yet another new last term as they come forward. Hear, hear.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us today. And Sharrelle, I turn it over.
Thank you. Thank you, Danita. It's so great to be here. And it's so actually great to share virtual community with you all. I actually want to shout out my department chair, who's super supportive of my work. I'm always glad when she shows up, as well as a couple of folks from the department, Renee Moore and also Nora Lee, and I see Esther from the School of Public Health. So it's great to have like some Dornsife camaraderie here. I appreciate your support. So today and everyone else here, is great to see you and meet you as well. So I really wrestled with how I wanted to kind of use my 15 to 20 minutes on this call, because I didn't want to do like a lecture as normal. And I wanted to, 2022 has been a reflective year for me. And I mean, I think for all of us. And so what I've decided to do, and I'll actually share my screen, is to kind of take you on a little bit of a journey of my story and how I really got to this, work and scholarship on inequities at the intersection of place, race, and health, and what I often refer to as embodied racism and embodied resistance. And before I get started, I actually want to acknowledge that the land on which we do our work here at Drexel are the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. I take this opportunity to honor the original caretakers of this land and recognize the histories of land theft, violence, erasure, and oppression that has us here. So in preparation for today's lecture, I actually found, I was rummaging through some old slides and actually found a video that I actually want to share with you all to introduce you to young scholar, 23-year-old Sharrelle, who was beginning to find her way as someone who wanted to do research, as someone who wanted to be in public health. And this presentation I was giving, it's the end of a presentation I was giving for my master's practicum at UNC Chapel Hill at the School of Public Health. And I hope that it kind of shares with you a little bit of my motivation around the work that I do. And so let me know, actually, let me stop sharing, because you may not be able to hear it if I haven't done the whole share screen and optimize sound. So let me backtrack. All right, I'm going to try this and let me know if you all are hearing this.
For me, the more important thing was being exposed to those contextual factors and seeing it, not just in numbers, not just, on paper in somebody's report, but seeing those things and thinking about how does this impact health behavior? How does this impact health outcomes? How does this impact the way in which we develop our interventions? And the reason I said, the tangled webs we weave, because I came away from this practicum with so many questions, research questions that I hope to explore in the future, just thinking about, neighborhood context and those types of things. And then the other part of it was being in those neighborhoods on a day-to-day basis reminded me of why I came into the field. These were extremely poor neighborhoods, and to think about that type of poverty in a country of such great wealth, it just reminded me that whatever we do in research, whatever we do in public health, it should be an end to a much greater means. And to get to that slide, kind of thinking through that, that's basically what kind of at the end of the day, why I enjoyed this internship so much and why this experience meant so much to me.
So that was me. Can you all hear me? I'm having a hard time actually, hold on a second, seeing everything all at once. Sorry. So that was me at 23, I think it was. And I had, like I said, begun my journey into the field of public health, really as a master's student, trying to understand and unpack the inequities that we see within the context of neighborhoods. And so I want to take you on a journey to share, the work I've done as a scholar, but also as an activist, because each place that I've been, my work has taken me from Rocky Mount, North Carolina, to Jackson, Mississippi, to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And each place represents, for me, an accumulation of past and present harms caused by the deep wounds of racism that Black communities have literally embodied to produce the striking racial inequities that we see. And these places represent the undeniable power of these same communities who have struggled and resisted to make ways out of no way. I have learned invaluable lessons and gained important insights by stepping outside of the walls of the ivory tower and allowing my intellectual curiosity to guide me to the places and, most importantly, the people I needed to encounter to do this work justice. And so at every juncture along the way, my understanding of the problems has been refined, my commitment to be unapologetic and unwavering in the truth telling required to disrupt the status quo has been deepened. And so, as I mentioned, I introduce you to my 23-year-old self, and we'll take you on a journey through the places I have been. So backtrack to 2007, and I was provided the opportunity as a master's student in public health to do an immersive 9-month project in an African-American community in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. North Carolina is my home, is where I'm from. And Rocky Mount is in the eastern part of the state, one of the poorest regions of the state of North Carolina. And this particular community, Southeast Rocky Mount, was a community that had all of the challenges that one might think about when you think about a neighborhood or a community that has been disinvested and disempowered for many decades. This 2007 experience meant a lot to me because myself, along with other students, were coupled with 2 Black women community organizers who had been on the front lines of challenging the systems in Rocky Mount, of fighting and scrambling and exposing the deep issues, and also thinking about the ways that they could help to mobilize the community towards action. And in one of my first encounters with these 2 women, Miss Mary Warren and Miss Naima Muhammad, they took myself and other students to a set of train tracks. And at the set of train tracks, they said that this set of train tracks literally represents the economic, the racial, the social divide in the city of Rocky Mount. And ever since I went to that set of train tracks in that city, I could never unsee the proverbial train tracks that divide so many of the cities, not only here in the United States, but around the globe. And it was this set of train tracks that really set me on a trajectory of asking the question, why? Why is it that certain communities, particularly Black communities, have been so disinvested and so neglected for so many years? Why is it that we bear the burden of so many health conditions in our communities? Why is it? Who's responsible? And what do we do about it? Those were the questions that I asked myself then. And those are the questions that I continue to ask myself now as I do this work. Fast forward to my dissertation work, and my work took me to the city of Jackson, Mississippi, the heart of the Deep South, where the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow is still very, very palpable, but also the resistance in the form of the civil rights movement. And this being a place, really a centerpiece of that movement in the 1950s and 60s. The picture that you see here is Freedom Corner. It is literally the intersection of Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King Jr. streets and boulevard. And it is within the context of one of the most disinvested communities in Jackson, Mississippi. So again, another symbol, another marker that both marks the pain of a place as well as its immense power. And so one of the things that I started to do in my work with Jackson was document how neighborhood disadvantage and certain conditions within the social fabric of the neighborhood might help us to understand chronic disease, particularly cardiovascular risk. And I remember that while I was in Jackson, I was able to connect with a long-standing activist in the community, Mr. Frank Figures. Mr. Frank Figures had been a young boy when Medgar Evers was assassinated. Mr. Frank Figures had gone to Tougaloo College, the only historically Black college and university that is on the grounds of a former plantation. He had been involved in the civil rights movement. He had been involved in the Black Power movement in Mississippi, and he had been in this space of struggle just about all of his life. And I remember that when I talked to Mr. Figures and I just kept rambling off, well, this community doesn't have this, and this community doesn't have this, and why doesn't this community have this? Mr. Figures stopped me and he said, don't just talk about our communities with regard to our pain. Don't just talk about what we don't have and what, has been done to us, the harm that has been to us. Whatever you do as you continue this work, as you continue to navigate this space and really to try to bring light and shed light on these issues, don't ever forget to talk about our power. We are more than what has been done to us. And even as you have to point out the pain, don't ever forget the power. And so that's a lesson that I took from my work in Jackson, Mississippi that is still ongoing. It's a lesson that I am embedding within the new, some of the work that I'm doing there currently. And Mr. Figures is continuing to offer his wisdom, his insight, his history of a people within the context of Jackson, Mississippi, who, yes, have experienced a lot of harm and a lot of pain, but also have exuded a lot of power. And so my dissertation work looked at these factors and looked at how they influence health, particularly in the South. And in the middle of that process, that dissertating process, I found myself in 2012 wrestling with the fact that I was finishing and completing my doctoral work in the middle of what was a growing Black Lives Matter movement. And so in 2012, I can remember the murder of Trayvon Martin, which was just a decade ago. I remember the Black Lives Matter movement that was born out of the pain of George Zimmerman's acquittal. And I distinctly remember sitting at my computer, staring at SAS code and a half-written manuscript, wondering if it was even worth it, if my scholarship mattered, given all that was going on in the world. And in that moment of frustration, of pain, of anger, I was reminded that bearing witness is part of our role. And that part of my job as a social epidemiologist was to make the invisible visible. Over this period, my scholarship deepened, and I began to explore even more critically the ways in which racism showed up in the brick and mortar and the social fabric of our country. And so I took on these hashtags of Say Her Name and Black Lives Matter and I Can't Breathe as a call to really unpack and uncover what that means when it comes to the ways in which this nation has produced and reproduced racial health inequities. I joined other scholars who were also in the literature talking about racism in explicit ways, showing how the connections between racism and public health, and how this call to really see the value and the worth of Black lives literally was and should be at the heart of public health. And so it was in this space, in this crucible of the pain of what we saw in terms of so many different unjust murders, but also the real power of movements to bear witness and show these injustices. It was in that crucible that my scholarship began to deepen, and I began to contend with the ways in which our society structures opportunities, it structures power, and produces these health inequities. And so my work then began to shift into really thinking about residential segregation and the racist policies that have produced that, whether it's the racist policies of redlining or the violence that the individuals inflicted on certain communities to keep communities segregated. I began to think about how that all shows up literally again in the brick and mortar and the social fabric of our country, and how these policies, these historical policies over time have literally embedded these inequities within our cities, in the United States, and later I would learn around the world. And so it is these policies that have produced the disinvestment that we see in communities. It is these policies that have led to the neglect that we see in our schools and the job opportunities, et cetera. It is these policies over decades in this country that have led us to where we are today. Fast forward to 2016, and I took my investigations abroad to Brazil and to think about how the color line, if you will, shows up in that context. I remember when I first went to Brazil, actually as an undergraduate student, and learned for the first time that Brazil was a majority Black country. A fact that most people don't recognize until you actually go there. And then fast forward to 2016, I was in Brazil, learning from researchers at the National School of Public Health and staying in what was called or referred to as the South Zone of Rio. And the South Zone of Rio is pictured here on the right-hand side. And you see that it is well developed. There's places for exercise and there's places and nice places for people to go. But every morning I would take a train from the South Zone of Rio to the North Zone of Rio, which is where Fiocruz and the National School of Public Health is. And I couldn't help but remember that dividing line, that same one that I saw in Rocky Mount in 2007. It showed up in Brazil in a slightly different way, but still no less striking in terms of the inequities. And not only did, as I rode that train from the South Zone of Rio to the North Zone of Rio, not only did that landscape change and the buildings change and all of the kinds of structures that would signal the investment, but the people changed. In South Rio, I was surrounded mostly by white Brazilians. But here in the North Zone, where the National School of Public Health actually sat, this was where people who looked like me, who looked like the communities I grew up in, this is where they lived. And I couldn't help but think, well, why? Why is there this divide? Why do we see these differences? What is it that has made these places so separate and so unequal? And so this work turned into one of my most, a study that I'm most proud of, and that's the intersection of place, race, and health in Brazil. It was published in Social Science and Medicine in a special issue on racism and health inequities. And it really cemented and helped me to understand and juxtapose segregation within the context of the US and segregation within the context of Brazil. And my dog is either amening or wanting to get my attention at this point. So fast forward to 2018, and my journey is almost over, and I'll take some questions. 2018, very specifically March 14th, 2018, which is one of the reasons I actually took this date for the ScholarSip, will be always remembered for me as one of the most tragic yet transformative days of my life. You see, on March 14th, 2018, in my kind of tradition of not only studying the places, studying places, but also being connected with people, I was told about an event that was a part of a 21 Days Against Racism campaign in Brazil called Young Black Women Moving Power Structures. A really good friend and colleague of mine told me that if you want to understand racism in Brazil, if you want to understand the folks who are on the front lines of the movements of racism and against racism in Brazil, you got to go to this event. And you have to go to this event because there you'll meet a woman by the name of Marielle Franco. And she is a powerful woman who has lived her life, one first as a Black queer woman who was born and raised in the North Zone or the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. She has dedicated her life to the work of human rights and human activism, particularly the state-sanctioned violence that Blacks and poor folks in Brazil are experiencing on a daily basis. And she's also been a scholar of these things, doing her work in sociology and local policy, which ultimately led to her work as a local politician, a local city councilor, which she actually got elected back in 2016. And so she told me, my friend told me, you have to go to this event because you'll meet her and you'll meet so many powerful Black women activists who have been doing this work on the front lines, calling attention to the issue of racism and racism in the context of Brazil. And so on 2018, on March 14th, the evening of March 14th, 2018, I found my way to a place called Casa das Pretas, which means Black Women's House. And I was there among about 40 to 50, mostly Black women who were there to learn and to hear from Marielle as well as the other folks on the panel. I remember witnessing her come into the space and the ways in which her just presence just lit up the space. I remember the excitement that I saw on people's faces as she came in and she greeted and she hugged individuals. And I just felt and sensed the power that was in that room, embodied by all of the Black women who had gathered there that night. And I was writing notes about all of this as as we gathered and as the panel went on, and as many folks talked about the work and the struggle and the ways in which these women were really standing up to the powers that be in Brazil. I remember going up to her afterwards and introducing myself and thanking her for welcoming me into that space. I remember thinking to myself, this is where it's at. This is where, the energy and the power and the resistance is at. And in fact, those of us who've been come up in this social media age, I posted on Facebook of how powerful the night had been. I remember departing that space energized and motivated and inspired and feeling like I could take on the world, feeling like the work that I was doing, even as a researcher, even as a scholar, mattered. And I needed to continue to do the work that made the invisible visible. I was on a high, and a high that I will never forget. Because as much as high as I went that night on the energy of Marielle and all the Black women there, was just as low as I went when I found out that she had been tragically assassinated just 2 hours later. And it was a gut-wrenching reminder of the ways and the tools that racism and other forms of oppression use to silence revolutionary voices. That night, my scholarship and my activism collided, and it has been the motivating force for the work that I have done since then. That night, she was bearing witness to the pain. She said, "We are dying, our people are dying." But she was also bearing witness to the power that the women in that group, in that room, represented the revolutionary spirit that the world really needed. And all in one night, both pain and power emerged in a way that was both tragic and transformative. And her legacy continues to inform so many of us who are engaged in this work in Brazil, but also around the world. So fast forward to 2020, and we found ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic disproportionately impacting the lives of Black, Brown, Latinx, Indigenous communities in this country and around the world. We found ourselves bearing witness to the state-sanctioned violence of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, and of George Floyd that literally sparked global protest. We find ourselves with a crumbling democracy, with white supremacy on full display. And we find ourselves really at a pivotal and existential moment, not only in our nation, but in our world. And when I think about 2018, and I think about 2020 and what we've seen over the last 2 years, for me and both my scholarship and my activism, it's been this wake-up call. It's been this deepening of my commitment to do this work in such a way that honors those we have lost to these systems and structures and infuses the work with their energy and with their spirit, almost as a mandate that we have to do better in the work that we do. And so for me, the last couple of years, and really for me, the last 4 years, have been me finding my voice, both as a scholar and as an activist, choosing that silence is no longer an option, that we have to speak truth about the deadly consequences of racism and other forms of oppression. And we have to think about how our scholarship, how our work, how our research aligns with the movements on the ground who are calling for a radical restructuring of our society. And so this quote is from a commentary that I wrote for the journal Epidemiology. The journal asked for 20 of us, including a colleague at the School of Public Health, to reflect on what it had meant to be an epidemiologist in the year 2020. And my closing remarks in that commentary are these: if our field is truly committing to preventing death, saving lives, and eliminating racial health inequities, then we can no longer be content with the status quo. In this moment and beyond, we must rise, resist, and align ourselves with the community and social movements demanding the kind of radical restructuring of society that we all deserve. Silence is no longer an option, and speaking truth to power is the only way forward. Justice demands it, and our collective lives depend on it. If 2020 has not convinced us of this, I fear nothing else will. I have also been fortunate in this moment, not only to speak about these issues, but with the $9 million philanthropic gift from the Dornsife, we at the School of Public Health have actually been able to build something that embodies those ideals. The Ubuntu Center on Racism, Global Movements, and Population Health Equity was the way myself and other colleagues at the School of Public Health could take seriously this moment, ask ourselves what is necessary because of the pain and what is possible because of the power, infuse the work with both the rigor that we need to bring to this space as scholars, but also the activism to actually get things done. And we have developed this really powerful vehicle that we're hoping will help to bring transformative change, not only here in the city of Philadelphia, but around the world. And Ubuntu is a South African principle. It means I am because we are. And as I've said time and time again, our name is not an anemic commitment to unity without accountability and justice, but rather a radical act of solidarity rooted in our shared humanity, unapologetic truth-telling, and a commitment to bold collective action that dismantles oppressive systems, disrupts narratives, and dares to imagine and build the just and equitable world we all deserve. The name connects us to a long lineage of transformative social movements locally, nationally, and globally, from which we draw strength insights, and inspiration. And so our vision is bold because the moment calls for a bold vision. And we're really excited about what we'll be able to do in this moment and beyond. And at this point, I'm now happy to take any questions that you all may have. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, let me interject here with sharing everybody's gratitude for your very thoughtful and powerful thoughts and sharing your story, which is an incredibly powerful one. And as we mentioned earlier, we definitely will open it to Zoom for questions and comments and discussions. And please feel, I think we all are on one screen, at least if you're in the screen view. Hopefully you can see each other. I think our chat probably is still not working if I'm not mistaken. So as Stacy had said at the beginning, if you would like to make a comment and don't want to be identified, if you send her either a message via Teams or an email, her email address is svs.samvictorysam22@drexel.edu. And otherwise, I'd say let's try. Just unmute yourself and start. And we find if there's too much overlap, we'll ask for the hands up and call on you. But if any way we can just get a real free discussion, that would be terrific. So thank you again, Sharrelle, very much. And let's see who would like to start the conversation.
I'll just start by saying thank you. We've never met. I'm Jennifer Quinlan. I'm from Nutrition Sciences over in CNHP. And I just really enjoyed your presentation and the way you presented the story. And I'm in the middle of writing a chapter. And I thought, no, I shouldn't take the time. I shouldn't take the time. I should keep writing. And I'm really glad I took the time. So thank you first for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you all for tolerating the dog in the background.
That was going to be my question, was what kind of dog is it?
He's a cockapoo and his name is Phoenix, and that Phoenix is very symbolic for me. But yeah, he was animated today. I don't know what was going on.
I have a question. I'm not quite sure I can phrase it, but let me give it a shot here. You know, we're in the phase 2 when there seems to be so much social disrespect for research and social and rather aligning with disinformation and whatever seems to affect your emotion and your opinions more. How do you, as a scholar who's working in a field that really the benefit of the knowledge, the insights, the truth that you find, can both the challenges of communicating it to people who may not, who have to change in a way to help change society and may not be receptive at one hand, and on the other hand, how do you also maintain enough of an unbiased distance when you're doing your truth finding to be able to give that story? I think it's a really, really challenging dual role you must be in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think to answer the second part of your question, I actually think I challenged this idea of being so removed from the work that you can't be unbiased. And I think that has also precluded us from the kinds of voices that we need to inform the work we do. My scholarship, I think, has deepened because I have intentionally placed myself within the context of communities to hear a lived experience that doesn't always get expressed, and to be close to a truth that doesn't always get to be told. And so I would have, the insights that I'm having now about how these systems, how these structures operate, how racism, the ways in which it has permeated our society, both locally, nationally, and globally, I wouldn't have had I just kind of stayed in my, cubicle and run SAS code and written manuscripts and done those things. I could not have gotten the insight by, just kind of being within the walls of the ivory tower. And so I would say that I don't know that it biases the work more so than that it deepens it. It causes us to ask different questions or deepen even so the question for me still is why. And along the way from '07, when I was a young budding, not knowing what I was doing, master's student, to now, I'm just continuing asking that question, why, but I'm asking in a much different way. And that interrogation over the course of this literal journey that has taken me to cities across the US and across Brazil, I think has brought a lens to the work that I would not have ordinarily have. And to talk about, and your first part of the question was, well, how do you navigate saying things that may not resonate? I'm thinking that's what you're saying, resonate with certain groups, or how do you communicate it in such a way that, gets folks to change? So one of the things that we did very strategically at the Ubuntu Center was we didn't name the center something we were against. So there's a lot of anti-racism centers that are popping up. We actually named the center something we're for, Ubuntu, humanity. So basically we're saying that these systems and structures that have been erected over centuries, over decades in this country, are inhumane at their core. The institution of slavery that extracted Black West and Central Africans from the continent into generations of forced labor. The colonization that expelled and created genocide within indigenous communities. Those were all based on inhumane understanding of people who were not white, right? And so it's that inhumanity that we have to be challenging. And for those of us, and what we're asking people to do is join with us in being more human as a society and dismantling the systems that are literally and have been literally designed to dehumanize us. And I think, and we're hoping that that approach, where we're actually having to do some really tough truth telling, will draw people in such a way that we have to interrogate our own understandings, our preconceived notions of these issues and these systems and these structures, and do everything we can to come along in the fight to dismantle and disrupt and to really build something new. And I think that in this moment, we have to do that. We are at an existential crisis in our society. It is racism, it is exploitative capitalism, it is all of these things that we have been exposed to in the pandemic that are showing us who we are, and we have an opportunity to create something different. And that's what we are calling folks to do in this work.
Thank you. I wish this was a real scholarship and we could continue this less formally, and I hope someday we will too.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of depth to this question, to this challenge.
Absolutely.
Hi, Sharrelle. This is Kim Golston.
Hi, Kim.
And I just want to say thank you, one, for your presentation and the story. And I fortunately, but unfortunately, have heard the story of your time in Brazil and the unfortunate death of such a wonderful person and revolutionary person. So I went on mute, I'm not sure how. But I also wanted to just say the framing of the Ubuntu Center and the framing of being humane to one another and treating people as human. I love that because we do, even in our work at Drexel as a part of the anti-racism task force efforts, we get caught up in the race part. And when we can move, not that we're not ignoring it, but move beyond to the person. And when we talk about culture of equity and all of these things, what we're saying is treat people like humans. That's what we all deserve. Mm-hmm. And I love how you got to the core of that as a part of the work with the Ubuntu Center. So thank you for Absolutely. All that you're doing. So
thank you so much. Mm-hmm. And I think that even something like Black Lives Matter that's what at its core, it's calling us to our humanity, right? Like I mean, and I think that's why it's been so powerful and been able to resonate. I know there's some people who say, well, all lives matter. I was like, but like people can resonate when we think about the ways in which our society, again, has structured itself, that whether it says it with a gunshot or whether it says it with inadequate housing or environmental racism or other forms of, or other ways in which it had, we have over and 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 over again in our country and in our world said that Black lives don't matter. To make that affirmation that we do, right, is really a really powerful reframe. And I think that in this season of narrative, and in the season that we're in, narrative is so important. And narrative has been a tool of the oppressor. It's been a tool that has been used to like say that Black communities don't deserve this or Black communities don't deserve that, because we've literally forced them to the margins. And in Brazil, it's the literal margins. And then we have blamed these same communities for the challenges that they have experienced without taking this deep and critical look at the policies, of the practices, and all of the things that have led us to this point. That's why in the work that I do, I start, even though redlining isn't the be all, it's not the silver bullet that got us here. I try to start with a historical perspective that says these things have been baked in literally to the brick and mortar and the social policy, social fabric of our policies, our practices, our way of being. And it was decisions by people who've done that, right? So if we can make the system, if we can create it, then we can unmake it, undo it, dismantle it, and build in its place something a lot better and a lot more humane, right? And so it's so important. So because what do you do with 1 million deaths? What do you do with 1 million deaths in the US? 6 million, and some estimates are 18 million. Esther, you probably know more than me that these estimates that even we have of the deaths from COVID-19, are an underestimation of the travesty that we have experienced as a nation and as a world. And so the question in this moment is, what do we do with that? In public health, we have an imperative to save lives, to prevent death, to prevent suffering. Like that's our impact, like that's at the core. That's why I have to go back to my 23-year-old self, because my 23-year-old self was so like, public health is social justice. And along the way, I lost that because everybody was like, publish, or get this grant, get this grant. Not public health and social justice. And I had to bring myself back to my 23-year-old self and why I came into the field to say, public health is social justice. And if public health is social justice, what are we doing about it in this moment? That's what drives me. And I think it's that drive that we need to instill in our students, because, they're going to inherit this world that we're building or tearing down. I don't know which one we're doing right now, but they're inheriting that. Generations yet unborn are inheriting what we do in this moment. And I was my alma mater. I'm a product of a historically Black college for women, Bennett College, which is where I really got my scholar activist roots. And we're rebuilding and trying to reshape Bennett's future. And the question that was posed to us was, how will you be a good ancestor? So at some point, we're going to be ancestors to the generations yet unborn. And so what we're called in this moment to be is good ancestors. And I want to be a good ancestor. I don't want to have sat in this 2020 through now and looked at it and be like, I guess we'll just go back to normal. I want to be a good ancestor. I want to be a good ancestor. I want to be a good scholar. I want to be a good activist. And I think I can do all of those things, even in a space that sometimes denies us of being fully human. So.
Very well stated. Thank you, Dr. Barber.
Thank you. Barbara, where are you coming from?
I'm a Drexel alum, Dornsife.
Okay, Drexel alum.
Right? Yeah, woo woo. You didn't call us out earlier. But no, your work is phenomenal. I need to stop by and visit.
Yes, we're getting it ready. We're getting it prepared.
I'll be around for alumni weekend because there's a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Okay,
but I do
so
want to
3600, 7th floor.
Right. All right, I'm in.
Stop by.
Well, unless there's another last question, I think there's so much here for us to all ponder over and digest. And as again, I'm looking forward to the day when we'll be able to have these events in person, and this continues again, not just in the formal setting, but to make these links. And Barbara, this was reassuring too, because we've always are trying now to get the different generations, the connections of people of interest of any of her topics to ScholarSip. So we're delighted that those of you who came today helped us continue that tradition. So again, thank you so much, Sharrelle, for taking time to do this.
Thank you.
For those of you who were writing chapters and took a break to take time to join us.
I appreciate you for I'm really militant over my writing time, so I appreciate those who took time.
Right. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you in a future ScholarSip and other, hopefully on campus here too. It's starting to look alive. So come join us.